Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special returning guest, JCM Berne. How are you doing today?
I'm good, man. How are you doing, Daniel?
Oh, excellent. I'm always excellent when I get to talk to somebody about some writing. So, I've been trying to get you back on for a while. So, it was nice that we had a little gap in the schedule and could do that.
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah.
oh, it's cool. I was going to move Joe up a little bit and go
There
there.
you go.
So that's nice. And I was excited to see, your new book release. So I actually, there's like all three are just sitting there in my Kindle, and I've just been kind of wandering around. It's been very
Full
difficult to get things
sending.
written or read.
And I got Return of the Griffin. I still love this cover.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
yeah,
the shark in the background. I talked
yeah,
to
yeah,
someone online. They're like, "Oh, is that a shark?" I'm like, "How could you miss the shark? Like, it's freaking
yeah,
huge."
yeah. That was the first
I
thing I
don't even.
saw.
I never saw the shark. I'm like, "What did you think that was?" And then I love this cover, Blood of Union. And the new one has a. If anything, it's a better cover, but I do not have a physical copy yet.
Mm.
The way Amazon works, you can't do that, right? You can't before releasing a book. You can't really
Yep.
order a clean physical copy. You can get one with the bar across it that says
Yeah,
not for
yeah,
resale. Like I don't want that.
yeah. Who
So
wants that?
there are no clean physical copies of the new book in existence as of today. But that releases what oh when you anyone watching this, it will be out already. It's called Shadow of Hyperion. It comes out September 12th. We're recording before that.
Yep, yep, yep. So definitely out by
Yeah,
this time. Yeah,
that's
like yep, December, I think, or first week of December,
okay.
last week of November,
You
something
can
like
read
that. Yeah.
Shadow of Hyperion. You can get it right now if you're watching this, and you can get Partial Function if you're watching this because it'll be out. It'll be out late October, early November, and I don't have a cover for that yet. Um, but that book I'm really excited about.
Oh,
Maybe extra excited about. Which yeah, don't ask why I have two books coming out at the same almost the same time. It was bad planning on my part. Totally my fault. Like I finished one book and the draft, and then a slot opened up for my editor for Shadow of Hyperion. She's like, "Can you? I'll take you early." I'm like, "Well, if you're gonna take me early, I got to write the book."
yeah,
I
yeah.
usually book a slot with my editor before I've written the book because that's how far in advance I've got to get her. Um, so I stopped work on one book, wrote the other book, then had to come back and get editing done on the first one. So everything got all messed up. So they're both being released
Mm.
at almost the same time. But
Oh, wow.
both have people punching dinosaurs. That's my theme for the year. This is the year
Awesome.
of men and women punching dinosaurs in the world of JCM Byrne.
That's
So
awesome.
that's apparently what I've decided to write about. I don't know one, but my new Partial Function is a straight fantasy.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I'm trying. Yeah, I had a lot of people sort of be like, "Well, I don't know about superhero. I don't know about science fiction. I like reading epic fantasy." I'm like, "All right, well, darn it, I'm going to write you one, and now you have no excuse." So we'll
Yeah,
see.
yeah.
We shall
And
see
you
what
have
happens.
punching dinosaurs. So yeah, it's awesome.
People punching dinosaurs, yeah, kung fu dinosaurs. I mean,
Oh, that's awesome.
what more do you want? So
Yeah, if you don't like that, you're probably in the wrong podcast. You're probably in the wrong spot.
that's right, right? Yeah, yeah. That I tell people that sometimes about my books. I'm like, they're like, "Oh, I didn't really like the humor," and I'm like, "Oh, you're reading the wrong book. Like, stop reading my books. Like, if you
Yeah, yeah,
didn't
yeah.
like the way I tell jokes, that's fine. I'm not mad at you, but go somewhere else then. Like, I hope you find
Yeah, I'm
something
not
you
gonna
love.
stop.
I hope you like some." Yeah, one of my beta readers for Shadow of Hyperion was like, "You should really take out the sarcastic quips because it like ruins the tone." And I'm like, "Dude, you are not reading the right person. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
that's all I have. That's my shtick, right? That the sarcastic quips is like that's the way my characters talk. You don't have to like it. You can say I don't like it. That's fine, but I'm not taking it out. Like that. That is my brand. That's how. It's the
Yeah,
only way.
yeah.
Honestly, I can't write any other way. If I'm not telling jokes on the page, I get bored, and I can't write. Like I don't have the discipline to just do like flat prose. Like I just don't. So
Tell
anyway,
them not to read
long
Spider-Man,
rambling
right?
diatribe. It's early,
That's fair.
and I'm.
You know, it's funny because you're like the third author I've seen within 2 days who has two books releasing relatively within like the same amount of time for each other. So it must be like the thing lately, or it must be like just how people's schedules have opened up. So that's interesting.
I don't know. Yeah, it was definitely a mistake. I really wanted the fantasy. I mean, I don't want to wait too long between releases of the hybrid heroes. I feel like you get a
Yeah,
certain
yeah.
amount of buzz, and then if it's 2 years between
Yep.
releases, people kind of forget who you are and they're not talking about it as much. I don't really know. There's probably a right way to do it. I don't know. I mean, ideally, you'd release them really fast. I can't, but I can only write them so fast.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah,
the
yeah.
fantasy novel wasn't really planned. I literally sat down one day and I got bounced from Spitball, and I was getting a few reviews of people or a few pieces of feedback from people sort of saying, I'm not really interested in a superhero thing. It sounds goofy or what. And people are, entitled to their opinion, but I felt like I really wanted to get farther in Spitball for purely egotistical
Oh
reasons.
yeah, yeah,
Nothing to do with sales, but I got bounced in the first round. I felt really bad about it. I'm not saying it wasn't deserved, but I felt really bad about it. And I was like, I really want to I'm going to write a book that I think will do well in Spiffbo specifically, right? It's this self-published fantasy blog off. Anyone who doesn't know, it's a major contest but for fantasy. So my book's a science fantasy, and I think it suffered some for the genre. Like people were like, I like this book, but I don't know. It's a lot like a sci-fi, not a fantasy. So
yeah,
it didn't do as well as it could have, maybe. So I'm like, I'm going to write a straight fantasy, so there are no excuses. So if I lose, I won't have any excuses. Like, well, I couldn't get any further. That's it. I'm done. So, and then I got a good idea. That's the other point. I mean, if I don't have an idea that inspires me, I can't. I also wanted a book that had a good pitch. Wistful Sending is very hard to pitch. It's very hard to come up with a sentence that like makes people want to read it. That's
yeah.
accurate, right? Like some books pitch really well. Like, did you ever read Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir?
No, because it's actually on our book club list, so it's a no-no
Okay,
until we
okay.
get to it.
But this is my favorite example of a book that just sounds so good in one sentence. It's also a great book. I love this book. I'm not saying
Yeah,
it's not a great book. I really do love it. But it's like lesbian necromancers in space.
yeah,
And
yeah,
like
yeah.
that, everyone who hears that is like, ooh, or not everyone, but a lot of people are like, ooh, that sounds
That's
different. That
interesting.
sounds like
Yeah,
something interesting. I want to read that. And this isn't like a knock. I mean, it almost sounds like it's a great book, but it also just sounds great in 4 words. Not all
yeah,
great books sound good in 4 words. Wistful Sending really, I can't make it sound good in like a sentence. So I'm like,
yeah,
I
yeah.
came up with a pitch for a fantasy book. I'm like, this book is going to pitch well. I'm going to start with a good pitch. And I did. I was very pleased with myself. It'll never happen
Oh,
again.
that's awesome.
It'll never happen again. I'll never have a good pitch for a book ever in my life, but one. When I got one. And if people don't read it, then I guess I'm done. All right.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but
I think it's hard though. Like my first fantasy book's like that, so I've been trying to figure out a couple things. But then my Kindle Vella series, I'm like, it's a buddy cop, lethal weapon stuff. It's a lethal weapon buddy cop story set in a fantasy setting, um, and with Mission Impossible type missions. And like, yeah, and people were like, "Oh,
yeah,
okay." I'm
yeah.
like, "Oh, I did it! I did it!"
That's
Now
a
that now
really
I have to
good
finish
pitch.
writing it.
That's
Yeah,
a really good pitch, right? That's a really good pitch. Like that'll draw people in because it doesn't sound like, oh, I've read a dozen of those before. That's the problem
yeah,
with so many fantasy novels, no matter how good they are.
yep,
So much epic fantasy is like, I've read that. It sounds in a sentence like something you've
yeah,
read 100 times, and it's hard to
yep,
get past that with a reader.
yeah, yeah, totally.
And I mean, it doesn't mean they're not original, but you're encapsulating that in your sense. So I'll tell you my pitch for my fantasy novel. It's Taken, the film, but
Yeah,
imagine
yeah.
it starred Michelle Yeoh and took place on Cradle and had
Oh, that's
dinosaurs,
awesome.
right?
That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Sold.
So, right, right. A lot of people have given me that reaction, which is really
Yeah.
interesting. It's the same people who are like, I don't want to read a superhero book, but they may have read Wistful Sunny because they've gotten a lot of like, seen a lot of reviews, or other people said you should really
Mm,
read this. I heard it was really funny, so I finally read it. But I get so many people are like, this is the kind of thing I would normally pick up. I can't
mm.
tell if I had a nickel for every time I heard that, I would have many, many nickels. It'd be a lot. Um, but I tell them this other pitch, right, for the fantasy book, and they're like, oh, that sounds like, give me an arc. I'm like, all right, you know. So and hopefully the book's good. It's not for me to say. I think, I was pleased with it. I thought it came together really well. It's also standalone. I think at
Oh,
this point
cool.
I'm in a 4 book series. Right? I feel like, some people are intimidated by that. You don't have to read all four. Right? You can just read one, but still, it feels like an endeavor. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm running. So the fantasy is a standalone. It's really done. Like you read the end and you're like, maybe I'll write another book with the characters in the setting, but it's not. It's not a series that way. So hopefully people like it, and hopefully I can get in. The other part is getting it into. I want to get it into Spiffbo 10, or as I like to call it, Spiff Box. I
Oh,
hope
nice.
everyone uses that term. I'm trying to get that to stick. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm afraid that you need to do like some computer wizardry to get in next year, because this year the 300 slots filled in like 46 minutes, I
It's
think.
like the San Diego Comic-Con on Big
Yeah,
Bang where they're all trying to
you
get the
quick and
tickets at the
refresh on
same
the screen
time.
as fast as you can,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
try to
yeah.
get a
Yeah.
spot. It's like getting
Yeah,
tickets
totally.
to a concert now. And I feel
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it's gonna
yeah.
be like 41 seconds next year, and I'm gonna be like, you know, my clock's gonna be off by minute. I'm gonna miss the window, or my internet's gonna freeze. This gonna no,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
no.
yeah.
30 more seconds, all I need. So
I
we'll
guess
see.
I interviewed someone last year and they to get into this current one and that's what they did though. Like they're like, oh sorry, I have to blah blah. And I was like, oh it's fine. I was like, I have my son. I was like, we can do whatever. So then they're like, oh I'm so sorry. They're like, I had to drive to my parents' house because, my internet was being weird and I was trying to enter. And so I actually interviewed them at their parents' house. So it was really funny. They're like, oh, my surroundings might look kind of different. And I was like, yeah, it's fine. I was like, whatever, I'm like, I usually have to go when we were traveling last couple of years. I just interview people wherever. So, but it was really funny. They were so worried about their internet, and I was like, no, I get it. I was like, you gotta have it working so you can get in. So yeah, it's funny because I always wonder if like Mark ever thought it would get to like this point, where like like San Diego Comic Con, like level of clicks and things like that. But
I,
yeah, it's
I
funny.
wonder. I wonder if I mean, people have discussed like if there's a more fair way to handle it. I can't think of one, right? Like
I can't either. Yeah,
that's the problem with these contests. Like there's a lot of controversy around different elements of the different like Spitball and space fic. But then it's like then you start thinking, well, these are volunteers. They're not making people aren't getting paid tens of thousands of dollars to run this. Like, well, it would be more fair if every judge read every book, right?
oh yeah,
But
yeah,
that's like
yeah.
that's like physically impossible.
It really,
Like
it really is, especially the time that they're given.
yeah,
Yeah,
300, but just in a year reading 300 books that's
yeah,
not possible.
yeah,
Or you could do some kind of pre-screening to like only 30 books get in, but how would you do that? Like I feel like you'd be missing the spirit of the competition if it was like only 30 books people knew about. Part of the
yeah,
whole
yeah,
point is it's indie. It's you're getting people who aren't clued into the indie community, don't know how to pitch it to booktubers, don't know how to generate buzz. Because beginning authors usually don't. So like how would you get them into the contest? Like I don't
yeah.
know. You wouldn't want to just pick 30 books we've all heard of and put those in. That
Yeah,
wouldn't be
I love it
fair to
because I
them.
can just people, do the list on Twitter and like
Right.
Twitter. I don't like I was just complaining to somebody. Well, I'm teaching in um a tech focused school now for social
Yeah.
studies. I'm teaching like some business classes and different things and
Yeah.
economics. And so it's really fun. But like we're really looking at that side. So the kids are really interested that I do this podcast. So we were looking at the analytics for different things. And I was showing them the analytics of the YouTube, my podcast, on different sites. And, but I was explaining to them, I was like, you really got to think about, I was like, I was like, it's hard for me. I said, I like every single book thing that pops up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, whatever, TikTok, and I share them constantly. And I follow so many different pages, even if I don't know the author, like the author, whatever. If it's fantasy or sci-fi or horror, I just like the like pages because it doesn't cost me anything, it helps somebody out. And I want the algorithm to center towards me. And I'm like, Facebook does a great job, but I'm like, Twitter, like it takes me forever now to find new authors. So when the contest comes out, I love it because all of a sudden you get like 30, 40, 50 authors on one list. And I'm just like, okay, have I followed this person yet? And I mean, every time I get like 40, 50, 60, new authors, even if they don't, make it, they're, the hashtag itself, I look for the hashtag. And then my Twitter community grows. So then I have this huge pool of authors to not only add to Kindle or wish list, but also, my possible interview list. And it's crazy that I still have to do that on Twitter, and Threads and Instagram and TikTok because I do it all the time, but the analytics only go so far. So when I tell people, I'm like, I told the kids, I'm like, it's really hard to be seen. They're like, what do you mean? So I was talking about the podcast. I said, I'm practicing for being an author for the same thing. I said, but I'm trying to get other people out there, not even myself. And I was like, it's really hard. I said, because you're literally going uphill towards those algorithms. And I think
Yeah.
that the contest really helps personally. I saw your book everywhere. Like I saw Wistful Ascending
That
everywhere.
is the
And then
only
people
way
were
I got
sharing book
it.
two. I mean,
That all started with that absolutely started with Spitball and Twitter.
yeah, totally.
Like
I've
because
seen it
my
all the
book
time.
my book had been out for 2 years, right? When that
Yeah, yeah,
happened.
yeah.
But it was last year I entered Spitball. I mean, that was my plan. I was going to enter during the year where I had book three coming out. That was my plan.
Hmm.
Because that way, I figured if there was any buzz to be had by the time it happened, I'd have three books, and that
Oh,
was that was
totally.
deliberate, right? So, but
Yeah.
then from that hashtag, I got some reviewers looking for things to read and looking for things to put on their channels. Say, would you like my book? And then so once
Hmm.
I did two things, right? I entered Spiffbo, and then I started messaging people. And anyway, so anytime someone is like, I got a lot of traction doing stupid stuff like And someone would be like, what should I read next? And I'd be like, why don't you read my book? You know, and like I give him a little pitch, or I'd offer him a free copy or the free audiobook or something. And that made a lot of difference. Audiobook
Oh,
made a lot
nice.
of difference in
Oh, that's good.
getting traction. A lot of reviewers do a lot of audio. People who read a
Yeah, they
lot of
have
books,
to.
they have
Yeah.
to. And a lot of people, because there are fewer books on audio, right? And then a lot of people will have a TBR, and they'll have an audio TBR that's much shorter. So you know Rob J. Hayes, right? The author.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
And
yeah. I know, Rob. Yep.
so he's got a ton of friends there, and he's got an enormous TBR, books he wants to read, books he has to read for his friends,
Yep.
right? He doesn't know me from Adam, I send him a book, you know, he might say I'd like to try to get to it, but I don't really know when. Maybe it'll be a year. That's fine. It's very
Yeah, yeah.
reasonable, right? But one day he was like, I need an audiobook. Anyone? And I'm like, I'll give you one for free right now, Rob. And I was really fast on Twitter, and he's like, whatever. And he read it, and then he gave me a pitch, right? You know, not a pitch, but he gave me a review, and he's
Yeah,
told
yeah,
his
yeah.
friends
I
about
saw that.
it,
Yep.
right? He'll retweet it because he liked it, and that only happened because of audio and because I was quick on the Twitter trigger. And I said, "Man, do you want my second book? It's not in audio." And he's like, "You can, you know, like very legitimately." He's like, "I have a huge list of things to read with my eyes. Like, I don't know
Yep.
when that's gonna happen."
He
I
writes a
don't blame
lot
him.
too.
Yeah, yeah. I
Like
mean,
Brandon Sanderson, like, he writes a lot of books in a
he
year.
writes a lot. He's a busy guy, man. Again, I hope
Yep.
no one takes this as me criticizing him. Absolutely, he's a lovely human being, but it's that
It's just
audiobook that
hard when
got.
you have that much to do. Yep.
And then I
Totally.
met Dirk Ashton last weekend, and I'm like, I know Rob J. Hayes. He's read my book, and Dirk is like, oh yeah, and so like now at least people kind of know me. It's kind of cool. Like it's like street. It's like I have this like street cred in this like very little community of India. Dirk Ashton's like one of the loveliest human beings I've ever met. He
Oh,
was
Dirk's awesome. I love
He's like,
Dirk.
yeah. We were at Dragon Con, and I hung out with Dirk a lot because I basically went to Dragon Con and spent 5 days at the bar, almost entirely. Like I hardly went to anything at Dragon Con except the bar. But anyway, that's a long story. But Spiffo was a huge in, and then working Twitter got me a lot very far. And then a lot of and then I got really lucky where some booktubers liked the book, and then once some popular booktubers like the book, and they put out a video, all watch each other's video, not all, but many booktubers watch other booktubers, right there. It's a
Yeah,
community.
yeah, yeah.
It's not a bunch of people talking about the books they read independently. It's a
Yeah, yeah.
community. They're always doing like shared streams. They're watching each other's videos. I mean, this is a very community. So like once a couple people have say, oh, this was really good, you should try this, and you keep coming up, and like end of the year, oh, and that's the only way I've got a lot of lucky traction that way. So it's been really nice. It's been really nice. And then I can tell people like, because you tell someone who's not in the community, like, oh, I'm a self-published author, and they don't really know what that means because literally anyone can be a self-published author, right?
Yeah, yeah. They think you're a
You,
vanity press is what they do.
you
Yeah.
could wake up tomorrow with nothing, and by tomorrow night, I could have a book of yours on Amazon, right?
Yeah,
Cover and
yeah.
all. It would be crap, but we could do it. I don't mean
Yeah,
you, I
totally.
mean any person, right? I mean, you could
No, yeah,
literally
yeah,
have
seriously.
not have a manuscript. We could write something up and put it on Amazon in a day, right? It
Yeah.
would suck, but we could do it. Um, so you tell your friends that, and I'm like, look, I know you think this is nothing, but like, put the title into YouTube and see what comes up. It's like it's kind of interesting. So that's my
Yeah, yeah.
little egotistical moment. I'm like, it's not nothing. So, I don't know. Anyway, but Spitball's a really good thing, but then you've got to milk it. You've got to work the community. I know authors where I feel I don't want to name names, but I feel like they're authors who I've seen like YouTube videos talking about how good their books are, but they don't comment. They're not sharing it on Twitter like the video. Like if a video calls you out, says this is a really good one of the best books of last year, like you should eventually know about it, and you should be like retweeting that, and you should be present, and you should tell that, make sure the reviewer knows you're appreciating. Like some people, I guess some people are uncomfortable doing that. People don't want to spend the time. I understand,
Well,
but it's like,
Kevin J. Anderson actually, oh my gosh, I've just watched too many podcasts now, but
yeah,
he was on, it was an older podcast, but like, so with his like independent press and everything, like he was talking about how there was and I talk to people about this all the time. So like I have a podcast, right? Like I'm on every app, I'm always doing stuff, And you take somebody like me, like let's just say, right, Kindle Vella series comes out and does okay. And then I go and, have a couple of books and, they do pretty decent. And then one does a little bit better. So, but, say you're at four. I say I'm at four. And then he had somebody who, they were thinking about bringing on to their company and amazing author, like 30, 35 books. They're all, really great, did really well, a lot of traction. But that author, try to make sure I don't say names or pronouns, that author literally came out and said multiple times on, on social media, I don't want to do anything other than write and have someone else sell my books. Well, the issue with that is that, Kevin's like in the interview, he says, the issue with that is even if you're traditionally published now, you have to do your own work on social media and everything, including whatever the company does. So, they did end up signing that person and they signed somebody like myself instead because they're like, oh, he's going to keep going with the podcast. He's got 3 seasons. I'm already booked up for season 4. I'm going to have to do something with like extra episodes or bonus content or something, which is a great problem to have. But, and then when you start to go into writing, it's like even if my books don't sell as much as theirs, they just want someone who's going to do the work and the traction. And I think
Stephen
that was one of
King,
the best indie interviews I've ever heard. I was like,
yeah,
dang.
like Stephen King never has to do another interview,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Any book he writes for the rest, he could live 50 more years. Every book he writes is going to sell a billion copies, right? Honestly,
His Twitter profile says, you know who I am.
yeah. Okay, I didn't know that.
Not
That's
author,
great,
you know who I
but
am.
it's
Yeah,
true.
it's
But it's
amazing.
totally true, right? Like Brandon
Totally true.
Sanderson, as much as marketing as he does, he could stop tomorrow. He could
Yep.
tomorrow go in a seclusion and say, "I'm going to keep writing. I never want to be on an interview. I never want to go to a con. I never want to talk to a fan. I'm just going to write books. You guys do what you need to do." He'd be fine. He would sell a million copies of what, I don't know the number, but a lot of copies of every book for the rest of his life because he's got a
Yeah,
fan
totally.
base. But unless you're one of those guys, right? Unless you're one of those guys, what's really interesting is go to some people who are traditionally published, check out their Amazon pages, count their ratings.
Yeah.
At first blush, you would think they're all doing great. Not true, right? Not necessarily true. Like the counting ratings on Amazon is a really nice, like really rough estimate of how well a book is doing. Because it's like super quick. You go and you look, but if someone has if someone has like 10 times more ratings than another person, they're selling more books, right? And they're doing better. Like that's just the way it is, right? It may not be 10 times as many, but it's something. So look around and you can see what matters. If you're another indie author and you're not sure, like, oh, this person won a contest, did that really make a difference? Did that in itself make all the difference? Go to the book, count the ratings. Are they doing real well? Or are they not doing okay? And you can see what the actual impact of stuff. That's my little trick. It's my hack.
Give me 1 sec, Joe. I'm so sorry. I'm just gonna have to
Yep.
pause this,
No, no, you
real
go.
quick. Sorry about that.
No worries.
We're at that 8 month stage, so the separation anxiety is like really get in now.
Been there.
Uh, and let me just pause that. Just gonna reset my stopwatch timer for us, and then Get the time. Luckily, I can edit this today and not have to worry about it. All right. That was like perfect timing too. I thought I heard him go and I was like, and check the time here is 8:33, so I'll know for later. All right, so we'll go there with that second question for our audience. So I actually I think I messed up the number there because this is your fourth book in the series, right?
My fourth book is coming out Tuesday.
Yeah, so fourth book. Um so we're gonna talk about that. For some reason I put
Okay.
third. I must have been from a different author. I must have like copy and pasted these and
No,
then
my
not
third book is
changed it.
Blood Reunion. That's what you put in the question. That's the last one that came out. That came out last Halloween.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay. I see. Okay, yeah, because we were talking about okay. So, but for some reason, your next book though is not there. So, must have cut it off because I was on my phone. I'm sending them to you. I must have cut it off or something. So, if we want, we'll go from there, and then if you want to talk about your next book as well, that would be a good spot to do it then.
Whichever works. You ask the questions, I just answer them.
Sorry. All right, and we're gonna start right from there. So it is 8:34, and write that down for him for me to do. So 8:30, 8:31. All right, and we'll start back up here in 3, 2, 1. So, what is your third book, Blood Reunion, about, and how did you come up with this idea?
Okay. So Blood Reunion is about I like to make every book have like a thing that you can easily remember if you're thinking back on the series. So Blood Reunion has vampires.
That's
Who are
awesome.
there are vampires in book two, but mostly book two is about giant sharks, which sounds crazy and it's not played for laughs. People are like, oh, so it's like goofy sharks? I'm like, no, it's not. Dead serious giant sharks. Okay, whatever. People, it's kind of funny, I guess. Three is vampires. So we see a couple different kinds of vampires. We see more about
Oh,
Roland's
cool.
past, because that's what I was doing every book. I was trying to introduce a little deeper understanding. Because in the first book, it's not, typical superhero. You think of like Spider-Man, right? You're starting with a kid in high school. You get his origin story. You get like it gets
Yeah.
his powers, and it goes from there. I didn't do that. We start off. He's been through the hero's journey. He's gotten his powers, learned how to use them, fought in wars for 10 years. It's done, right? That's what happened before the beginning of book one. So every book you get a little bit of not like flashbacks, but just like a sense of more of like what are the forces that shaped him when he was younger. So you get more of that in book three. Book three is a return to space. So it takes place entirely in space on a couple different space stations, and it gives you a lot more insight into the sort of deep background of the world. So, like, what happened 40,000 years ago, 50,000? How did we get to this? Because in the first book, you got the stable situation. You've got the Illdropper controlling, basically control the galaxy. It's the evil, pseudo evil empire running everything. And it's a very stable sort of situation that's been like that for a long time. This is like, well, what happened before that? Where'd they come from? And you get some insights into that. Um, it's hard to explain what happens too much without spoiling things. Like a lot of it is the
Yeah.
reveals, right? I'm all about you don't really know what's happening until the end of the book. Um, um, I like to open a lot of questions and answer them kind of slowly, and it's a particular thing. People have responded really well to Blood Reunion. People who have read it mostly say it's their favorite book, which is kind of nice. It should be. I mean, I should know what I'm doing better than what I knew when I wrote the first two. When I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
know what I was doing, right? So hopefully,
Yeah.
it should be better. Um, but yeah, vampires. Where did I get the idea from? I get ideas from so many different places I can't even tell you. Um, I don't even remember. You get to a point in the series where you're like, there's so many things I need to do with each book. I'm trying to progress the
Yeah.
overall storyline.
Yep.
I already knew like the deep background. I got a, I fill in details as time goes on. I get, oh, this would work here, this would work here, but you know, um, I had a rough idea of the overall, like who the big bad is, what the overall arc of the series is. So every book just has to progress you along that line a certain amount. So, but it also has to be a book on its own. So it's this tricky combination of things. You got to pull it all together.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but vampires are vampires, like vampires are my favorite bad guys because it's the most primitive evil. They want to eat you.
yeah, yeah,
There's nothing more basic than that. Like anyone who wants to like take over the world, you're like, well, why are you taking over? It's hard not to get cartoonish, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's hard not to be like, well, they're trying to take over the world to make it better. Like they it's conflicted, but like there's to a person, nothing is more evil than this other thing wants to eat you. That is fundamentally incompatible. Like you can think they're sexy, but really they're you're their food, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
like
yeah.
it's like I like vampires as like the big bad or a big bad, because it's simple. Like you have to stop them from eating you, right? There's no in the end in a way there's no quandary there. It's like, well, maybe we should let them win. No, because if they win, you're eaten, you're food, you're dead, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it's not like it. So I don't know, and it's also I also like it because it's sort of distant from the real world problems,
Oh,
right?
totally.
People aren't like if you get a political enemy, you're going to find people who are like, well, I kind of agree with their politics, right? Of the bad guy, and then
Like
you have a
Thanos.
problem. Then you have a problem, right? But with,
Yeah.
with with the vampires, it's not like, well, my granddad also wants to eat people, and I think that's okay, right? You're not going to have an argument over the Thanksgiving dinner table over
Ah,
whether they're really bad. Is it really so bad to want to eat all the humans? Like we're all on board with that. That's bad. We're not good.
yeah,
So for a lot of reasons. And then I got inspired by, so you can't tell from the clearly, but he is sitting. So a lot of the action takes place in an arena on the space station. It just happens to be where a
oh,
lot
that's
of fights
cool.
happen. It's not an actual like sport book, but it's just that's where things happen. And that's a sumo ring. I'm a huge fan of sumo. It's actually a tournament starting today while we're recording this.
Oh,
So
that's cool.
I'm gonna have to watch the first day's matches when we get off this call. And I wanted to put a sumo ring in there, even though it's not called that by name. If you read it very carefully, it's an Easter egg. You will see that it is in fact a sumo ring, um, a doyo. But yeah, I don't know. I got the ideas from so many places. I'm an old man. I've read a lot of fantasy and comic books for a long
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
So I take ideas from a lot of places. And sometimes I forget where they're from.
Oh,
Some
yeah,
of
yeah,
them,
yeah.
and then someone will be like, oh, remember like this comic? I'm like, I took a lot of stuff from there. I forgot about that comic.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's my short and long answer to the question.
It's a problem. I read so many indie comics or like Valiant or just like not like mainstream comics, and I love the more unique the story or the art, and especially the combo and the I love Birthright. That's a really great like graphic novel series, but like yeah, there's just so many. Like I've had people ask me, I'm like, I don't know anymore. I'm like, I think I have one idea that spurns into no, it's like popcorn. And I was like, I don't know where the original seed came from half the time, but I think that's what makes a good idea, right? Is that it wasn't just from here, it was from maybe three or four or maybe
Yeah,
10, whatever, different things. So I think that's personal makes a good idea and a good
yeah,
story, I think. But yeah,
yeah,
I had an idea the other day that popped up, and I can't tell you where it came. I think my son and I were like, we're debating if it's going to be like my typical like grim dark or typical fantasy, if I'm going to go epic fantasy with it. But like, we were just sitting out there. He was teething. It's 2 in the morning. I'm looking at the moon, and then I like was thinking of some other thing that someone did, and all of a sudden this idea came to me with like the moon, and I was like, oh man, I was like. So the next day I sat there and I just like typed like
yeah,
crazy, and yeah, it was really good. But I
yeah.
remember that, but I don't remember where the original idea came from. But yeah, that's really funny. So I just was curious what your progression approach is with Rohan, because you have these different books and you've talked, and I know I've seen a lot of reviews that really like the progression, how you give the background for his story. But I was just curious, like, and you said, like Spider-Man, you start at the beginning, right? So it's a different type of progression. So I was curious, in terms of maybe his powers or his background, how you have changed writing his progression from book to book.
So it's not it's okay. It's just so people aren't confused and like read it. It's not a progression fantasy the way people mean progression fantasy, where
Yeah, 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 yeah,
like they power up a lot in each book. I I like those. I've read those. I love Cradle. But that's not what I'm doing. He
yeah.
will power up over the series. He has been, but it's much slower. Like it's incremental. I don't know how to handle that in a global scale, if people can become 10 times stronger in a year, then I don't know how to make the whole world work.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
don't do that. It's much more like a comic book, like a traditional, like Invincible. Invincible, he learns how to fight, he gets stronger over years, but it's a very slow kind of thing. The character development is more, what happens is I try to make him make, you can't have him perfect. He's got to make mistakes. He's got to be believable mistakes. I like to say that I steal from mistakes actual people make, right? Like when you're trying to do better, people make actual. I can just look around. It's like like learning how to say. Your second book is learning how to apologize for things, which
mm,
is hard. People have a hard time apologizing and doing it right. Um,
yeah, yeah,
so trying to make a different set of mistakes in every book, and then I know I want his worldview to change over time. So, the beginning of book one,
mm,
he has Rohan. He was a soldier for this army for the Empire. He has, at a great cost, he's won himself free. They said you can leave, you can go, and he's like tucked himself away on this out of the way place, and he's like living a simple life, and that's all he wants, and that's all he wants, right? So he's gotten away from the Empire, and he wants to chill, and then he has friends, he has found family, he wants to keep them safe. By book three, that's what's happening. He's got to do stuff to keep his friends safe because
mm,
people are at risk. It's a dangerous world, not through any fault of his own, but that's what it is. So he's got to shift from I don't want to be in this world of warfare anymore. Then he's got to say, like, how much is he willing to do to protect the things that are important? And then he's going somewhere slightly different over time, and I know where that is. So it's
mm,
easier when you know where you're going. Like I know how the
yeah, yeah,
series is. So all I have to do is I have to get you there in believable and small steps. And when you know where you're going and you take small steps in that direction, readers will, even if they don't know where the end point is, they see the small steps and they're meaningful to the reader. It's like, okay, things are cooking, things are changing somewhat, right? But subtly. Um, how do you pull it off? I don't know. You've got you have these moral quandaries, and he's got his friends who are telling him to do things, and you've got to just make sure the arguments work. Like what is he saying? Like in book two, in a way, was an overreaction to book one. So, but in book two, in a way, he's like really wants to go and do something to save the earth because he thinks it'll win him absolution from the people he pissed off when he was there. And he kind of finds out that it's not that simple because it isn't. It's like, oh, good, there's a war, Earth's in danger. I can save them and they will love me for it. And it doesn't happen
yeah,
because, you can go to people's rescue, but they don't always forgive all the crappy things you've done. So, yeah, a lot of it's luck. Sometimes you'll do something and like it'll work on two levels and you only really planned one and you realize it
oh yeah,
works on
yeah,
another
yeah,
level. And I depend on that a lot. It's not all planned. Sometimes I'll write a plot and I'm like, oh, this actually like solves two problems or three problems,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I only really meant for one, but the other two came along for the ride. So
yeah,
that's one of the joys of being a writer, though, is when you come
yeah,
up with a solution that works on multiple levels. So and then a lot of it, yeah. So people are noticing the subtle changes. Again, the changes there because I know where I'm going with it. And I
yeah,
highly recommend, if you're going to write a long series, you really need to have a rough idea of where you're taking it. You
yeah,
don't
yeah,
need,
yeah,
and you probably don't want to write out all the details. Like I can't imagine like strictly outlining 20 books and then writing 20 books
yeah,
because
yeah,
I
yeah,
think you'd be bored. And you have to think if you're going to write 20 books, it's going to take you years or whatever. You're going to come up with some better ideas along the way. You don't want to
yeah,
you
yeah,
don't want to start with an outline and then be like, oh, I had this better idea, but it doesn't fit. So, oh well, I can't have another new idea for the next 10 years, right? That's not going to
yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah,
So I have a rough idea of where I want to go, and I don't know when I came up with it. It changes too. Like I know where I want it to end, but it's very possible that in the next 5 years I'll come up with a better way to end it. You know,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but I
yeah,
still have a general idea of the arc of the personality growth for this character.
mm,
It's just yeah, and you got to it's hard. You're writing an overpowered character, it's easy to make your overpowered character, if he does too much, to seem like a bully. And that's not
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right. If he can, because if he's in a room with a bunch of people, he can almost always beat up everyone in the room, right? And so, how do you make a character like that sympathetic and you want to root for him? Because if he's just always beating up everyone in the room who disagrees with him, like
Yeah,
he's just a bully, and that's a bad guy. Like that's
yeah,
a fine bad guy, but that's not what I'm writing. So all these
yeah,
things
yeah.
work together in a very sort of complex way. I actually just hired a developmental editor. I hired Sarah Chorn to like read all my books and help
Oh,
me with
cool.
the big picture because
Yeah, yeah,
I've
yeah.
never had that. I don't have anyone where I bounce off the big picture. I don't have any
Mm.
friends who are like, oh, this is what's going to happen over the next 10 books. I don't have anybody. So Sarah's going to be my poor Sarah. She's going to hear all the crappy half baked ideas. I'm going to dump them on her. But she's reading the first four now. She worked on Partial Function for me in my fantasy. So I
Oh,
really
cool.
liked what she did there, and I was like, I need a developmental editor. I think on a very big, because I have a line editor for the Hybrid Helix. She's
Mm.
really good with like the dialogues, the echoes, the sentence
Yeah.
structure. She's fantastic, but she doesn't look at the story as a whole. That's not her job, right? I didn't hire her for that. She doesn't advertise herself as doing that. That's not. So I hired Sarah Chorn to just be the dev editor, um, and I'm really looking forward to her helping keep me on track with that big picture stuff. You don't need another person, but I think, I suspect it helps because there's some stuff you
Yeah,
want
yeah.
to change. You don't want to go too, you don't want to make too big a change in one book with the person's personality. So then it doesn't ring true. So I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question. Very rambling.
No, it does. I think it's hard too. Like I'm like, oh, I don't want to just write 10 episodes or what? Because at first I was like, I just want to do Kindle, I want to do like 50 episodes ahead,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that way I can go, into the
yeah.
spring and stuff. And but I'm like, it's kind of hard because I'm writing it like kind of like a TV show. And I'm writing it as seasons, every 10 episodes, like its own season. And then one just goes into the next. And I have a big bad and this and that. And I'm like, well, you don't want to just like do that the first 10 episodes. So I have like this progression and I actually got all the way outlined pretty much like basically to season six. So like basically like 60 episodes. But I want there to be, I'm gonna like every 5 seasons, essentially like 50 episodes, I'm gonna do like an anthology once the rights shift back. I think it's like a year and a half or something. I'm writing in a world that's not my own fantasy world that I'm like doing a lot of stuff for. It's almost like its own thing, which is kind of nice because I get to just have fun and do sword and sorcery stuff and D&D stuff. But yeah, but it's hard though, because you have to like I'm trying to make really cool things happen and developmentally think, what will, turn the key, for the next episode. Like what's going to make people want to be like, oh, I got to go read this right now, like this next chapter or episode. So I'm trying to keep people there. So, and I think that's, very much what I've talked to, my friends who do television, say the same thing. But, it's also like another thing you said, which I really like, which is what I'm thinking is like, um, and it's weird because like I'm doing almost like a progression fantasy for my two characters. I'm taking them kind of like one of them I would say like is around level like 2, I would say, like Shadow Walker, and then the other one's like a level 1, like War Priest. So I actually came up with I did a lot of D&D research and I just like game Pathfinder and stuff, and I actually came up with their own classes and like skills and things. So I'm like, well, it's nice to get new, progression stuff along the way. But the thing that's interesting is that I found is that it really doesn't matter though, because those things will be cool and it'll be neat for the people I'm targeting, but the overall thing is going to be the progression of the story. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned that because I think everybody thinks that, even with progression fantasy, like it's great that like I don't know, I'm blanking on Will's main character. I love those books. I'm on like book 7 right now. But anyways, so the main character, right? Like, so he's doing really cool things, but none of those powers would really, matter in the long run if the story hadn't progressed. So to me, I had gotten really great advice from a couple of progression fantasy authors and writers, and they're like, you really want to progress the story. They're like, nobody really cares. The powers are cool and stuff. They're like, but nobody really cares unless your story's progressing and unless that power or skill or whatever helps, with the story. And I was like, I was thinking of a couple times, in movies or TV shows or something, where that's the case. I'm like, okay, yeah. And I think that's where like a TV show like Smallville, like Clark might get he might use a power in a different way or learn it or whatever, but it's like I think they did such a good job because he could beat up everybody in the room usually, unless they had kryptonite, which that's like Smallville's whole thing, is making him more of a human like character.
Well, with
But the
Superman,
writing was because of it.
yeah, with Superman, they try to give him kryptonite, and then they give him like friends as a vulnerabilities. But
Yeah,
part of the reason many people don't like Superman is like that; those get tired.
yeah. And there's only so much you can do, yeah, that way. But
Yeah,
yeah, but it's interesting, I think, because again, like you take like Dean Kane's, Superman, Lois, and Superman. And I love that show. And I gotta be honest, like I don't remember many times where he dressed up like Superman and beat up the bad guy or did the thing. To me, the thing that made it so interesting was the human problems he had. And somebody mentioned this. I think Brandon Sanderson in his online lectures mentions this and says, that show was great because of, the human aspect, not even the superhero side. So I always think it's interesting. But again, I think again, it's not that like we can't relate to the fact that he has superpowers, right? But or your character that way, but we can definitely relate to those, problems of PTSD or trauma or found family or trying to defend family, and I think that's really what a lot of people miss out of the superhero genre is like they miss the connections. They're just there for the power of
yeah,
the costume and they forget that those people are people. But
yeah. I get a lot of mileage out of him trying to get a date or find the right or a good cup of coffee. He spends a lot
yeah,
of energy on that, and those are aggravations people can relate to. Um, so yeah, I spent a lot of time on that. Yeah. With Cradle, it's really interesting. I would love to be able to like trap Will White in an elevator and ask him. Here's what's fascinating to me about Cradle is that dual storyline. How you're
yep,
getting what's his name
yes,
on Cradle. Meanwhile, you're getting dribbles of this much more high level storyline happening with I forget the name of the character who gives him like the gemstone and
yeah,
like the people who can wipe out entire universes with a slash of their sword.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and then he's like fighting like monsters on like in like this ditch, you know, and that those parallel stories are giving you this hint of where you're going right from the start. You're ending up somehow connecting back to that bigger picture. So it
yeah,
gives you this feeling of like narrative direction, you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
right from the start. I really enjoyed Cradle. I finished it. I read book 12. I quite liked it. Um,
Oh,
you know, it, one day I'll write a progression fantasy. I feel maybe I have an idea for
yeah.
one, but who has time?
Yeah, yeah.
you know,
Rounds is cool. I started to read that one right before my son was born, and then I got detracted. I have to go actually keep forgetting I have to go back to it. But
yeah,
yeah, like I don't know. Oh, it's Lyndon. That's his name, Lyndon. Yeah, like I like how you get
yeah,
Lyndon's story and you're down here so that you can connect with that. But then yeah, you also see the rising stars. You see just how far the progression fantasy goes. And I think that was just brilliant. Because at first I was reading, I'm like, okay, I like this. And then as soon as that part happened where you realize that, oh my God, you realize the entire breadth and spectrum of this, it was really cool.
yeah.
Yeah, it was
I have mixed feelings about it. I would love to be able to do an experiment where you could take all that stuff out and have a bunch of people read the version of Cradle where you just see it from Lyndon's point of view,
yeah,
and a
yeah, yeah.
second version where they could read it with as it was written. And I really wonder. I think just how necessary that bigger picture. I don't know. I'm
I've had
fascinated
a
with
lot
it.
of talks with people. I think it was key personally.
Okay,
I think it was, and
you're not the
Will's
only
even said
person
that.
to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, Will said that, and I think when he was on with Wizard Wars and Words and those guys like Jed, Rob, Mike, and Dirk, he actually had mentioned that because he's on there like 4 times. I sometimes just go back and re-listen to just Will's episodes. There's just so much in there.
I'll have to listen.
And yeah,
Okay,
he
listen.
actually mentions that. He mentions that
Yeah.
early in the story, he didn't have that, and people were kind of like, whoever they read it, they're like yeah, it's good, but it's pretty typical. And then once he had that idea and, changed that, all of a sudden, whoever was reading it was like, oh man, this is totally
That's
different.
interesting.
Yeah, and that's what I found most interesting about that's why I always find interesting about the writing process, and how different people
Yeah.
come up with stuff. That's why I do this podcast, so that I can be like, oh, that's really interesting how, people made these connections or changes they made. Kelly McCullough actually has one of my favorite series, the Fallen Blade series, and it's amazing. And he talked to me in my interview about how he had this story for a long time and it didn't work, and then he went and did bunch of other stuff, did web mage series, and then they're like, oh, we want something like dark fantasy. And he went back to his original story and the change that he made, he's like, glad I didn't get rid of it because he wrote it out. Most people like they dump it or whatever. I don't get rid of anything. Look, mine's always been on computer for the most part, or I have journals and still have them. But and he changed a couple things and the same thing, and all of a sudden has this amazing character with R.L. Kingslayer and Triss, his shadow dragon, which is very different than anything I've ever seen anybody do. So I highly recommend people. It's a great writer's workshop type of series, and it's just really quick, really fun. But yeah, like that was like the same thing. So to me, I always find it very interesting how people are doing things. But again, I think that you starting in a different spot compared to Spider-Man, or I think that's where a lot of people, like the current Spider-Man, over other ones, because it was just redundant after a while. You're starting over day one. It's like you can only see that so many times. Same with Batman. I think Matt Reeves' Batman, did a little bit better than some of the other ones. But
Yeah, I didn't want to tell the story about a teenage kid discovering his powers. Like, it's been done. I don't
yeah,
have
yeah, yeah,
anything new to
to death.
say. I mean, I based my story in many ways on Invincible, but I was like, I didn't want to tell a lot of the Invincible story is, if you ever read Invincible, it starts with him, he doesn't have powers. And I
Yeah,
think in
yeah,
the
yeah.
first issue, he's like flies for the first time, right? That's not really a big spoiler, but clearly that's what happened. You know what's coming, right?
It's been out
So,
for about 14 years. If it's a spoiler now, I don't know what to tell
yeah,
people. I remember reading.
yeah.
I think it was longer than that 'cause I got the first graphic novel when I was in community college. I have the first actual issue, and then I bought the graphic novel later.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
it's funny to see how far it's come and
Yeah,
everything. But it
yeah.
was really cool when I first read it. It was an interesting, yeah,
Such a good
interesting.
show, such a good comic, such a good show. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I didn't want to tell that. I don't know why. I didn't want to tell that story, and I didn't want to. I wanted this, and part of it is I wanted this sense of like a lot of his dark moments happened during these 10 years fighting in wars for people he didn't want to fight for. And the whole point is he's done bad things, right? He's done bad, and he alludes to them, and he says, I've committed little genocides, and I'm like, that's not an exaggeration. And I'm like, I don't necessarily want to put that on the page.
Yeah, yeah.
Because if you have a guy who's done bad things in the past and he's making up for it, you can empathize with that. But if you read him doing the bad things, it's a lot harder.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You can empathize with the guy. Imagine a character. A character's in like prison, trying to get redemption for a murder. He says, "I murdered some people. It was wrong. I'm sorry." You can empathize with that guy. But if you've got to see the murders,
Yeah, yeah.
right, on screen or on the page, I think it's harder. Right? We can forgive the thing that we weren't there for. So I try. So that's another.
Yeah,
I didn't really think of that until now, but it's probably a good move not to go back and tell those stories in great detail, which I never
yeah,
will.
yeah.
That's
It's like,
never. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I have a prequel short story out, but it's only a little bit before, and it's a very minor story. So anyway.
Oh, speaking of that, so I definitely want to get to this because I know we're wrapping up on time here. But
Oh
so I
yeah.
saw this on your website and I didn't realize like you were doing this. So I was curious what your foreign powers
Okay.
was about and how I like that little quote you had, a twist of the hybrid helix. So I
So
just want to make sure to plug that. So
the the helix is I call the series a hybrid helix. Helix is just a spiral, and I call it that reason for a reason because I always feel like the story when people it's not a progression, it's not a line, you're not just going forward. I feel like in real life when you don't make progress that way. You take 2 steps forward, you go in one direction, but then you kind of you backslide, you make a mistake, you go back to where you were a little bit over time. Like so, right, you go one way, then you go back. Over time you may spiral your way up, you may generally get more towards your goals, but it's never a direct path. So I felt strongly about this. So and then I call each book a turn. So you turn the helix, one more turn around. And then I was like, well, if I'm going to write a short story, it's not a full turn, just a little twist. It's
I like
a
that.
little bit around the helix, just a little twist. So it was my being a little goofy with the words. I like the words. So there are 2 twists of the hybrid helix out now. There's a story called Foreign Powers, which takes place. Oh God, I'm pretty sure it's between books 2 and 3. Oh, that's going to bother me. I think it's after Return of the Griffin. I wrote it a while ago. Um, and it's just a side story. He goes to a planet he goes to Andervar to why does he go to Andervar? Oh man, I wrote the story a while ago. He gets involved in a little problem on Andervar, and he resolves it. So it's a short. It's meant to introduce the character and some issues. It's fine. I'm not a short story writer. I wouldn't. I wouldn't tell everyone's got to read it. I wouldn't say that. It's probably the wrong thing to use as a reader magnet because it's a story. It's not bad. I don't think it's great. I don't know. I'm terrible at pitching this thing, but
Is
it's
it through your newsletter though? Like people can get it through the
yeah,
newsletter?
yeah. If you subscribe to the newsletter, you'll get it for free, and then you can
Oh, cool.
unsubscribe right away. No one will have their feelings hurt. But if you do that and you subscribe to the newsletter, you'll get an intro news. And I never send newsletters. I'm terrible. You'll get like 3 a year. I mean, I'm just awful about sending newsletters. But if you get the newsletter, and the first one you get, you'll get a link. And I can put this link on Twitter. I'll give the link to anyone who asks me for free, even without an email address. To a story called Zero Twist, which is a story of how my main characters sort of met. Because in the beginning of the book one, they've known each other for several months. This is a story from like 3 months prior, and it's my martial arts tournament story. I had to write a martial arts tournament story,
That's
and
awesome.
Zero Twist is that, and it's a better story I think than Foreign Powers. It's not a great story, but it's fun and it has a really good ending punchline. There's a it's all based around a particular joke that my dad used to tell, and I think that's worth reading. But you don't need to read it. Like it doesn't give anything away that's gonna like my other books. I feel like if you skip a book, you're gonna miss stuff that's like
Yeah,
important to the overall storyline. The shorts don't have anything where you really are missing, but it's like it's added stuff, and there's jokes in there, so some people might find it funny, and there's martial arts tournament stuff in there and jujitsu stuff in there, which made me very happy because I'm a big MMA fan. I was like, I got to put a martial arts tournament in my book somewhere, but I don't want to make a
yeah.
whole book about it, so I made a short with a martial arts tournament, and like
That's awesome.
I got my little character who represents Dana White, and my character who represents like the judges and the commentators from MMA. So it's all in there. So if you're a real MMA fan, I think it's the book of mind you'd most like, the thing you'd most appreciate. I think a lot of people read it have no idea. They don't know anything about like martial arts, so they
Yeah.
don't get like. There's a lot of little in jokes that you sort of get, but it's
Well,
fine.
that's cool.
So yeah, so those are my two frees that anyone can get very easily. Subscribe to the newsletter, you get Foreign Powers. It's like just sends it to you, and then in the first newsletter you'll get a link. You'll get like an intro with a link to Zero Twist. I also tweet that every so often, the link to Zero Twist, where you can just download it
Awesome.
because I'm like read it. So
Well, thank you so much, Joe. Sorry, I got to wrap up on
my
the time.
pleasure. No, no, no,
Yeah,
we're good.
again, everybody knows you can find Joe's, links in the description and everywhere on, social media. Joe, thank you so much. I hope you have a good rest of the day,
Okay.
and I'll talk to you on social media, my
Thank you,
friend.
Daniel.
Have a good one.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Appreciate it.
See you.